Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Republican pollster Dustin Olson.
Let's bring in Republican pollster and host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast, Dustin Olson. Dustin, good morning to you. What do you think about the results of the Iowa caucus? Good morning.
Well, it was historic, to say the least. You know, the highest percentage that any Republican has gotten is actually back in 1976 with Ford, got 45%. George W. Bush in the modern era got 41%. This is a historic percentage, as well as the margin, 30%. Actually, what is in the past, when a candidate in either party in the last 30 years gets anywhere in the high 30s and wins by more than a 5% margin, they almost always become their party's nominee. So we're in something that looks a lot different than that.
As early as next week, let's bring in Republican strategist Dustin Olson and
Examiner and Dustin Olson, pollster at American Polls. Thank you both for coming on. We talk a lot. In fact, the whole country is talking a lot about this Washington Post poll.
The guy who put that poll together. His name is Dustin Olson. He comes to us from Washington, D.C. He's the host of a podcast, Political Trade Secrets. We like that podcast.
Dustin, of course, Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House is saying, polls, who listens, who watches polls? Watch.
Polls are polls, right? They are going to be all over the place. They're going to, they don't tell the whole story, actually. And that is just the way a poll is.
They don't tell the whole story, Dustin, but these polls tell a very compelling story.
Well, as a pollster, I can tell you it is accurate that polls are indeed polls, but I would also go a little bit further, and when you put a bunch of polls together, you get what we call is a trend, and I would say the trend for Joe Biden is not good. You saw the recent Fox News poll. We also had bad news for the economy there. The Wall Street Journal poll, same thing. I mean, every single poll, actually, I don't know of a single poll right now that has shown good news on the economy for the president, and I would say it's less Bidenomics and more Bidenflation.
Welcome back to the program. We really love our polling geeks. And I think the apex predator over at MSNBC is Steve Kornacki. Here's what he said about the current polls, Trump-Biden.
Let's just start with the bottom line. When you ask folks, hey, if it's the general election and it's Trump versus Biden, in our poll, Donald Trump now leads Joe Biden by 5. This is the biggest lead NBC has ever had in 16 polls for Donald Trump over Joe Biden.
All right, my next guest is not a polling geek. My next guest is a pollster with American
I'm a polling
Research
geek, that's fair.
And host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast. Dustin Olson, welcome back to the program. Okay. What does that mean? 5 points. Every other poll, previously showed Biden ahead, 2019, 2020. Now they're saying Trump crossed a Rubicon back in November, and it's been on the rise since.
Well, first of all, Kornacki's kind of like it's a performance art when he's up at the board and he's doing that stuff. It's actually fun to watch. It's absolutely the case. You can tell that things are moving. The momentum is moving in that direction. And I think it really, it's been, I think, 20 plus years ago. If you remember the Wellstone funeral, Democrats had their rally at the Wellstone funeral, and they just went too far. And then ultimately we ended up with a Republican winning that Senate seat. And I think this is just kind of what the left does. They just go way too far, and then people start to react. And ultimately, though, I think the issue mix, when we test this in our polls, the issue mix, I was actually just looking at a poll for a client just before we got on, and the issue mix there was the economy, the border, taxes, education. Those were the big issues. And when you think about those issues, they're great for Republicans right now. And also with the going too far, in our polls, 80.2% believe there's a double standard when it comes to the legal system in this country. And there's a lot of people, Democrats and Republicans alike, who see it from different perspectives, but they are losing their faith in that process, which is terrible for our country. Plus, another thing I think that I've seen happen is that over the last year, we've watched the disapproval rating for Biden track his disapproval of the handling of the economy. It's starting to track his disapproval of his handling of the border. And we are starting to see legacy media actually covering some of the problems that we're seeing there. And we did a poll that 62% of Americans believed that that drug cartels, China, terrorists are all exploiting our southern border for human trafficking, the drug epidemic, as well as possible terrorist activities. So all that together, this is just like a storm building against Biden, and we know he doesn't have the capacity to deal with it. And it was one of the most brilliant things that Republican governors did, which is sending folks to the blue cities and letting them deal with it. We did a poll actually in New York City back in December. It was a fascinating poll. New York voters, very enlightening, but they actually said plurality want to elect people who will be tougher on illegal immigration and protect New York taxpayers, as opposed to politicians who would promote their sanctuary city policies. So even in blue New York, it's starting to change. And in that case, crazy, Andrew Cuomo actually in the Democratic primary would beat the incumbent mayor because of his mishandling of the migrant crisis.
Wow.
Well, one thing I will say about borders, border security is compassionate. Open borders hurt people. And ultimately, I think Republicans need to make that very clear if they want to continue winning on this issue.
Yeah, don't give me a lecture about the rule of law on January 6th when you let 10 million people cross illegally. I got to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Olson is a pollster for American Pulse Research and Polling and host of the Political Trade Secrets podcast. And he joins me now to discuss. Thanks for being with us today.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So how about that, Dustin?
He's a Republican strategist, and he joins us now. You have managed political races, so look, Donald Trump, 2 victories in a row. It looks like he is on a clear path to the nomination.
You predicted Trump's rise to the presidency back in 2016. How are you feeling about 2024? If you were in Vegas right now putting money on it, what do you think happens November 5th, 2024?
In 2016, it was obvious that he has the ability. We had done work on the 2016 convention. We saw really he's kind of a non-linear thinker, and he sees things other people don't, and he seems to be able to move numbers. I mean, you were just talking about the vice presidential pick. I'm sure he hasn't actually picked somebody. However, it is a great way to get people thinking about him being president, thinking about him making that choice. You know, he's has you thinking past the sale. I mean, these are the kind of things that he's capable of that other people just don't think that way. And I would say that you can't count him out.
The New Hampshire primary is heating up, with former President Trump in the lead at 51%, according to a new Suffolk Boston Globe poll.
Also joining us is Republican strategist and pollster at American Pulse Research and Polling, Dustin Olson. Even if she wins in New Hampshire, though, will she be able to take Trump in South Carolina and beyond? Because it just doesn't seem that way.
Well, first, she's absolutely right. It is a 2-person race. At this point, it is a race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and that's what our polling has showed at American Pulse, as well as recent polls around the country. But interestingly, to my colleague's point with Republicans at a House party, actually, Donald Trump in the St. Anselm poll this week was polling 40 points ahead of Nikki Haley amongst Republicans. The issue in New Hampshire, as we all know, they allow undeclared voters to be able to be participants. And without Joe Biden actually participating in the New Hampshire primary, the left-leaning undeclareds are more likely to participate. Now, as far as South Carolina goes, I mean, that's really going to be the end of her campaign.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, I'll be talking about US politics and the upcoming presidential election with the pollster Dustin Olson.
أهلا بكم في برنامج تقرير واشنطن. لمناقشة هذا الملف معنا هنا في استوديو كيفن سيرالي الخبير في الشؤون الإعلامية في أتلانتيك كونسل. معنا أيضا الشريك التنفيذي في مؤسسة أوسلن للاستراتيجيات السياسية والمستشار السابق في الحملات الانتخابية الجمهورية داستن أوسلن. إلى تغيير ربما في مسار الانتخابات؟
Yeah, so in all of our American polls.
نعم، ففي كل نتائج استطلاعات الرأي الأمريكية رأينا أن ترامب يسيطر على الوضع، ولم يتغير الأمر فعليا على مر الأشهر القليلة الماضية. لكني أتوقع وأنت محق تماما أن حالة الطقس ستؤثر على الوضع. ما رأينا؟
I want to bring in Dustin Olson now, a pollster for American Pulse Research and Polling. Dustin, thank you for taking the time to be here. There seems to be this disconnect where we see these reports that come out and that the economy is improving. That is something that you would believe that President Biden would be able to tout on the campaign trail. Yet Americans, many are just not feeling good about the economy. Why is there that disconnect?
Yeah, in our own polling, the president's job approval, actually the disapproval, tracks almost exactly with their disapproval of his handling of the economy. And there's a couple of things you already noted, some of the places where the economy is doing better, but there does seem to be like a daily reminder for a lot of voters that you go to the grocery store, you go to the gas pump, you're reminded that things are quite a bit more expensive than they were just a few years ago. So it seems like that is a constant reminder for voters, which is why they continue to have this point of view that while the economy is bad, they actually don't see it getting any better since they haven't seen things actually reduce in price.
Because, we like to get a wide variety of voices on No Spin News. So we got Sean Bartley. He's coming to us from Ashland, Ohio. He is a pollster for American Pulse Research and Polling. Okay, my numbers from Monmouth. And again, I'm not endorsing the Monmouth poll. It's not been great in the past. But does that coincide with what you're seeing?
Yeah, we're seeing these kind of numbers everywhere. Wall Street Journal had President Biden at his lowest approval rating in the history of their survey with him as president. Our American Pulse polling has shown the same thing.
So in the US, all eyes on New Hampshire as the Republican presidential candidates battle for the support of voters there. Donald Trump, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are all vying to win their party's nomination, and Tuesday's vote will prove the latest test. So joining me live now from Washington, D.C. is pollster Dustin Olson. So a very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us here today. And a huge amount of focus, understandably, on the Republican nomination after Donald Trump's stunning victory in Iowa. Is this beginning to look like a one-horse race, do you think?
Yeah, I think that was, well, first of all, it was historic. He beat 50%, which means that a majority of the Republicans in Iowa were supporting him. Also, it was the largest margin and largest percentage the Republican has ever gotten in the contest in Iowa. So that has actually shown up. I've been looking at all the polls happening in New Hampshire this week. We had first, right out of the gate, first poll in New Hampshire after the Iowa caucuses. The St. Anselm poll actually showed a 7% bump for Trump out of Iowa. And then we have Suffolk and the Boston Globe have been doing a daily tracking poll. And they've actually shown that Trump has gone up from about 50 to 52% throughout the week. And then,
hey, Sean, have a Merry Christmas. Thanks for helping us out. Really appreciate it.
Merry Christmas. Thanks for having me.
Nikki Haley last night said this is effectively a two-person race, and I think she's right. Unfortunately for her, it's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump.
Dustin Olson, thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Hey, Dustin, really appreciate it. I hope you'll check back in with us from time to time as the race unfolds. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
I'm just so glad that you've highlighted all those issues that are impacting the American voter at the moment. On that note, many thanks to you, Dustin Olson, for joining in with your precious insights. Thoroughly appreciate. Thank you so much for joining in on CNN News 18. And that brings me to the end of this newscast. Thank you so much for watching News 18 Global with me, Akanksha.